The frozen wind cut through Zelda Carson's threadbare coat like 1,000 knives as she stumbled through the whiteout, her fingers already numb beyond feeling, wondering if this God-forsaken Wyoming blizzard would be the last thing she ever saw. She had trusted the wrong man. Benjamin Marsh had promised her a new life when they left Arizona 3 months ago, painting pictures of his family ranch in Wyoming where they would marry and build their future together. Instead, when the first snowflakes began falling 2 days ago, he had looked at her with cold eyes and told her the truth. There was no ranch. There was no family waiting. He had debts back east, and the men he owed were closing in. Taking her along had been a mistake, he said, one he needed to correct. He had left her at an abandoned mining camp with nothing but the clothes on her back and half a canteen of water, riding off into the growing storm without looking back. That was yesterday. Or maybe it was 2 days ago. Time had lost all meaning in the endless white. Zelda's legs gave out beneath her, and she crumpled into a snowdrift that came up to her waist. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were shaking too violently. The wind screamed around her, drowning out the sound of her own ragged breathing. This was it, then. 22 years old, and she would die alone in the middle of nowhere, another forgotten soul the frontier had swallowed whole. She thought of her mother back in Quartzsite, Arizona, dead these past 5 years. At least she would not have to know what became of her daughter. Zelda's father had died in a mining accident when she was just a child, and her mother had worked herself into an early grave trying to keep them fed. Zelda had left Arizona searching for something better, something more. Instead, she had found this. The cold was not so bad anymore. That was probably a bad sign. She let her eyes drift closed. The sound of hoofbeats broke through the howling wind. Zelda forced her eyes open, but she could barely see through the snow. A dark shape materialized from the white, growing larger. A horse. A rider. She tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. The rider dismounted, boots crunching in the deep snow. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and a face came into focus above her. A man, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and ice clinging to his stubble. His brown eyes were wide with alarm. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, his voice rough but urgent. "Madam, can you hear me?" Zelda tried to nod, but she was not sure if her head actually moved. The man did not wait for an answer. He scooped her up from the snow as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Even through her frozen haze, she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've got you," he said, his voice firm and certain. "I've got you now, always. You're going to be all right." He carried her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patient despite the storm. Getting them both mounted was awkward, but he managed it, settling her in front of him and wrapping his heavy coat around both of them. His arms encircled her as he gathered the reins, and Zelda felt the horse begin to move. "My cabin's not far," the man said, speaking close to her ear so she could hear him over the wind. "Just hold on. Stay with me." Zelda wanted to ask who he was, what he was doing out in this hell, but she could not form the words. Instead, she let herself sink against his solid warmth, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. True to his word, it was not long before a structure emerged from the blizzard. A small cabin, sturdy and low to the ground, built to withstand the brutal Wyoming winters. The man dismounted and pulled her down after him, then half carried, half dragged her to the door. He kicked it open and brought her inside, out of the wind at last. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace already banked with embers. The man deposited Zelda in a chair near the fire and immediately set about building up the flames. Once he had a proper blaze going, he turned his attention back to her. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. "You're half frozen. I'll get you some dry things and then we'll warm you up proper." He disappeared into another room and returned with what looked like an old shirt and some blankets. He handed them to her, then deliberately turned his back. "I'll see to my horse. You get changed." Zelda's fingers were still too numb to work buttons properly, but she managed to peel off her frozen coat and dress. Everything was soaked through. She pulled on the shirt he had given her. It was enormous, hanging down past her knees, but it was dry and soft from many washings. She wrapped herself in the blankets just as the door opened again. The man came back in, brushing snow from his shoulders. He had put his horse in what must be a small barn or lean-to attached to the cabin. He looked at her, seemed satisfied that she was decent, and nodded. "Better. Now let's get some warmth back into you." He pulled the chair closer to the fire and grabbed another blanket, draping it around her shoulders. Then he went to the stove and began heating water. "Coffee," he explained. "Hot and strong, best thing for warming up from the inside." As Zelda sat there, slowly thawing, she got her first real look at her rescuer. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were a warm brown that seemed at odds with the hardness of his features. He moved with an easy competence, like a man comfortable in his own space. "What's your name?" Zelda finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. He glanced at her, a slight smile tugging at his mouth. "Samuel Ingram. Most folks call me Sam." "Zelda Carson," she replied. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Ingram." "Sam," he corrected. "And you don't need to thank me. What kind of man would I be if I left you out there to freeze?" He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it over to her. "Drink this. Careful, it's hot." Zelda wrapped her hands around the cup, relishing the warmth. She took a careful sip and nearly gasped. It was indeed hot and strong enough to strip paint, but it was exactly what she needed. "What were you doing out in the storm?" she asked. Sam settled into a chair across from her, his own cup in hand. "I was checking on my cattle. I've got a small herd in a canyon about 2 miles from here. I wanted to make sure they were sheltered proper before the worst of the storm hit." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "What were you doing out there? Nobody should be traveling in weather like this." Zelda felt her throat tighten. The shame of what had happened threatened to overwhelm her. "I was abandoned," she said quietly. "The man I was traveling with left me at an old mining camp. He said he could not afford to keep me around anymore." Sam's expression darkened. "He left you in this?" His voice was hard with anger. "What's his name?" "It doesn't matter," Zelda said quickly. "He's long gone by now. I was a fool to trust him in the first place." "No," Sam said firmly. "He was a coward and a bastard. Pardon my language, but any man who would do that does not deserve to be called a man." He set his cup down with more force than necessary. "How long were you out there?" "I'm not sure. A day, maybe more. I lost track of time." Sam shook his head, his anger giving way to something that looked like wonder. "You're lucky to be alive. Another hour and I would not have found you in time." He stood up abruptly and went to a cupboard, pulling out some bread and dried meat. "You need to eat. When's the last time you had food?" Zelda tried to remember. 2 days, I think. Maybe 3. Sam cursed under his breath and began slicing the bread. He brought her a plate loaded with food and stood over her until she started eating. The bread was a bit stale, but it tasted like heaven. She ate slowly, her stomach protesting after being empty for so long. As she ate, Sam busied himself around the cabin, checking the fire, making sure the shutters were secure against the storm. Zelda watched him, still not quite believing she was here, alive and safe. This man had saved her life without hesitation, and he was taking care of her with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "How long will the storm last?" she asked. Sam glanced toward the shuttered window. Hard to say. Could be another day, could be 3. These late March blizzards are unpredictable, but we've got plenty of supplies and we'll be fine here. We. The word sent an unexpected warmth through Zelda's chest. After being so utterly alone, the idea of being part of a we, even temporarily, was deeply comforting. When she finished eating, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Sam noticed immediately. "You need sleep," he said. "Take the bed, I'll make do out here." "I can't take your bed," Zelda protested weakly. "You can and you will," Sam said, his tone brooking no argument. "You've been through hell. You need proper rest." He disappeared into the bedroom and emerged with more blankets. "Go on. I'll wake you if anything changes." Zelda was too tired to argue further. She made her way to the small bedroom, which contained little more than a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. But the bed had a real mattress and pillows, and when she crawled under the quilts, she thought she had never felt anything so wonderful. She was asleep before she could form another thought. When Zelda woke, disoriented and confused, it took her a moment to remember where she was. Gray light filtered through the cracks in the shutters. The storm was still raging outside, the wind howling like a living thing. She sat up slowly, her body aching in a dozen different places. Her fingers and toes tingled painfully as circulation returned to them, but she could move them. That was something. She found her dress hanging near the fireplace, dry now. Someone had spread it out carefully to catch the heat. Sam, obviously. She changed quickly, though the shirt he had lent her was far more comfortable than her stiff travel dress. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Sam at the stove, cooking something that smelled incredible. He turned when he heard her, and his face relaxed into a smile. "You're up." "Good, how are you feeling?" "Sore," Zelda admitted, "but alive. Thanks to you." "Sit," Sam said, gesturing to the table. "I've got eggs and bacon. The chickens are in the barn, so we've got fresh eggs even in winter." Zelda sat, watching as he plated the food and brought it over. He had clearly been up for a while. His hair was damp, as if he had washed, and he had shaved the ice from his stubble. He looked younger without it, and Zelda found herself noticing details she had been too frozen to see before. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. The capable, scarred hands that had pulled her from certain death. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Sam spoke. "The storm's still going strong. We're probably looking at another full day before it clears." "I'm sorry to impose on you like this," Zelda said. Sam looked at her, his expression serious. "You're not imposing. I'm glad I found you when I did." He hesitated, then added, "Can I ask you something, of course? What were you planning to do? Before you got left behind, I mean. Where were you headed?" Zelda stared down at her plate. "Benjamin, the man I was traveling with, he told me we were going to his family ranch, that we would get married and start a life together. But it was all lies. He was running from debts back east, and he decided I was more trouble than I was worth." "Where are you from?" "Quartzsite, Arizona." "It's a small town, not much there. My mother died 5 years ago, and I've been working as a seamstress ever since. Benjamin came through last fall, all charm and promises. I thought he was my chance at something better." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong." Sam was quiet for a moment. "You're not wrong for wanting more," he said finally. "And you're not wrong for trusting someone. He's the one who failed, not you." His words, simple as they were, made Zelda's eyes burn with unexpected tears. She blinked them back. "What about you? How did you end up with a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming?" Sam leaned back in his chair. "I'm from Missouri originally. Came out here about 4 years ago looking for work. Spent some time working on the big ranches, saved up enough to buy my own land and start my own herd. It's not much yet, Just about 50 head of cattle, but it's mine. I built this cabin with my own hands, and every year I make it a little better." "Do you live here alone?" Zelda asked, then immediately felt her face heat. "I'm sorry, that was too forward." But Sam just laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. "It's all right. Yes, I live alone. No wife, no family out here. My parents and sister are still back in Missouri. I write them when I can, but I only see them every few years. Don't you get lonely?" Sam considered the question. "Sometimes, but I like the work and I like the freedom. Out here, a man can build something that's truly his own, no one telling him what to do or who to be." He met her eyes. "Though I have to admit, it's nice having someone to talk to. Someone who isn't a horse or a cow." Zelda found herself smiling despite everything. "I imagine they're not the best conversationalists. My horse Copper thinks he is, but he's wrong." They fell into an easy conversation after that, trading stories about their lives. Sam talked about learning to survive the brutal Wyoming winters, about the first time he successfully delivered a calf on his own, about the time a pack of wolves tried to take down one of his steers, and he fought them off with nothing but a torch and his rifle. Zelda told him about growing up in the Arizona heat, about learning to sew from her mother, about the strange and difficult people who had come through Quartzsite over the years. As the day wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, Zelda realized she was more relaxed than she had been in months, maybe years. There was something about Sam that made her feel safe, and not just because he had rescued her. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and he did not try to fill every silence with empty words. He moved around his small cabin with quiet confidence, and every time his eyes met hers, she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her ordeal in the snow. By evening, the storm had not let up. Sam made dinner, a hearty stew from salted beef and root vegetables he had stored in a cellar beneath the cabin. They ate by firelight, and afterward, Sam produced a battered deck of cards. "You play poker?" he asked. Zelda raised an eyebrow. "A little." "My mother thought it was unladylike, but I learned anyway," Sam grinned. "Good. Fair warning, I'm pretty good." He was not exaggerating. They played for buttons and pebbles, nothing of real value, but Sam won most of the hands. Zelda did not mind. She was enjoying herself too much to care about losing. When she did win a hand, Sam gave an exaggerated groan and accused her of cheating, which made her laugh until her sides hurt. "You have a good laugh," Sam said suddenly, his expression soft. Zelda felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you." "I mean it. After everything you've been through, you can still laugh. That takes strength." Zelda did not know what to say to that. She had never thought of herself as particularly strong. She had simply survived because there was no other choice. As the night grew late, Sam banked the fire and insisted once again that Zelda take the bed. This time, she was too tired to argue. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm and the sound of Sam moving around in the other room, she found herself thinking about the way he had looked at her across the card table. The warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his rough hands. She was in dangerous territory. She had just escaped one man who had lied to her and abandoned her. She had no business thinking about another man, especially one she had just met, and yet she could not help it. Sam Ingram had saved her life, yes, but he had also treated her with a kindness and respect she had rarely experienced. He did not look at her like she was a problem to be solved or a burden to be endured. He looked at her like she mattered. Zelda fell asleep with a strange feeling of hope blooming in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and cold. When Zelda woke and went to the window, she gasped. The world outside was transformed into something from a fairy tale, everything covered in a thick blanket of white that sparkled in the sunlight. The storm had passed. Sam was already up, dressed in his heavy coat and preparing to go outside. "I need to check on the cattle," he said. "Make sure they made it through all right. There's food in the cupboard if you get hungry. I should be back by midday." "Can I come with you?" Zelda asked impulsively. Sam looked surprised. "It's cold out there and the snow's deep. It will be hard going." "I know, but I'd like to help, if I can." Sam studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you'll need warmer clothes." He dug through a trunk and produced a heavy coat that had probably belonged to him when he was younger, as well as a pair of boots lined with fur. They were too big for Zelda, but with extra socks, they worked well enough. They set out into the pristine snow, copper-breaking trail ahead of them. The cold was sharp and clean, nothing like the deadly wind of the blizzard. Zelda's breath plumed in front of her face, and her cheeks stung, but she felt more alive than she had in months. The cattle were huddled in a canyon where the walls provided shelter from the worst of the wind. Sam counted them carefully, checking each animal. One of the cows had a new calf, born during the storm, and Sam knelt in the snow to examine it. "Looks healthy," he said with satisfaction. "Tough little thing being born in weather like this." Zelda watched as he ran his hands over the calf with surprising gentleness, checking for any signs of frostbite or injury. The mother cow stood nearby, watchful but not aggressive. She seemed to trust Sam. "You're good with them," Zelda observed. Sam glanced up at her and shrugged. "They're my livelihood. But more than that, they depend on me. That means something." They spent the morning making sure all the cattle had access to the hay Sam had put out before the storm. It was hard work, and by the time they headed back to the cabin, Zelda was exhausted. But it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something useful. Back at the cabin, Sam made lunch while Zelda thawed out by the fire. "You did good work today," he said, as he handed her a bowl of soup. "Not many people would want to trudge through snow to check on cattle." "I wanted to be useful," Zelda said. "You've done so much for me, I wanted to give something back." Sam sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Zelda, you don't owe me anything. I did not save you expecting something in return." "I know," Zelda said softly. "But that makes me want to help even more." They ate in silence for a while. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. "The snow will start melting in a few days if this sun keeps up. The trails will be passable again. I can take you into town. Silverton is about 15 miles from here. It's small, but there's a hotel and a general store. You could stay there while you figure out what you want to do next." Zelda's heart sank. Of course. Sam was just being practical. She could not stay here forever, imposing on his hospitality. But the thought of leaving this cabin, leaving him, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "How long do you think before the trails are clear?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. 4 or 5 days, maybe. Depends on the weather. 4 or 5 days. Zelda nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Sam would go out in the mornings to tend to his cattle and do other chores around his property. Zelda stayed behind and did what she could to help, mending tears in his clothes that she found, organizing his somewhat chaotic cupboards and cooking meals from his stores. She was a good cook, better than Sam, and he did not hide his appreciation. "Where did you learn to make biscuits like this?" he asked one evening, helping himself to a third one. "My mother," Zelda said. "She said a woman who could cook well would never go hungry because someone would always be willing to feed her in exchange for a good meal." "She was a wise woman," Sam said. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Sam told her more about his life, about his dreams of expanding his herd and maybe one day building a bigger house. Zelda shared her own dreams, the ones she had almost forgotten in the years of just trying to survive. She wanted to open her own dress shop one day, a place where women could get well-made, beautiful clothes at fair prices. You could do that in Silverton, Sam said thoughtfully. There's no proper seamstress there. The nearest one is in Cheyenne, which is a long way to go for a dress. The idea was appealing, but Zelda could not quite picture it. Silverton felt too close to Sam and yet too far. She would know he was out here, just 15 miles away, and she would have to resist the urge to ride out and see him. And that would be pathetic, pining after a man who had simply been kind to her in her time of need. Except Sam's kindness felt like more than that. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. The way he found excuses to stand close to her, to brush against her hand when they were both reaching for something. The way his voice softened when he said her name. Or maybe she was imagining all of it, seeing what she wanted to see because she was lonely and grateful, and more than a little bit in love with him. That realization hit her one evening as she watched him read a letter from his sister that had been waiting for him since before the storm. He was smiling at something his sister had written, and the firelight played across his features, and Zelda felt her heart contract with the certainty of it. She loved him. She loved his quiet strength, his gentle hands, the way he treated her like an equal. She loved the life he had built for himself out here, the way he found joy in simple things. She loved him, and in a few days she would have to leave. The next morning, Sam announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. I was planning to go before the storm hit, but obviously that did not work out. I'm running low on a few things. Do you want to come along? Zelda hesitated. Part of her wanted to see Silverton to get a sense of what her life might be like there. But another part of her wanted to stay here in this cabin, where she could pretend for a little longer that this was her life, her home. I'll come, she said finally. The ride into Silverton took most of the morning. The town was indeed small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a main street. But it had the essentials, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and a small church. Sam helped Zelda down from Copper and tied the horse to a hitching post outside the general store. Inside, a middle-aged woman behind the counter looked up with interest. Sam Ingram, as I live and breathe, thought maybe the storm had gotten you. Not quite, Mrs. Patterson, Sam said with a smile. Though it was a close thing, he gestured to Zelda. This is Miss Zelda Carson. She's staying with me for a bit. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose, but to her credit, she did not make any improper assumptions. Pleased to meet you, Miss Carson. You from around here. Arizona originally, Zelda said. I was traveling through when the storm hit. Well, you were lucky Sam found you. He's a good man. Mrs. Patterson said this with the air of someone defending a favorite nephew. Now, what can I get for you folks? While Sam went through his list of supplies, Zelda wandered around the store looking at the goods on offer. There was fabric here, not a wide selection but decent quality. She ran her fingers over a bolt of blue cotton, imagining what she could make with it. You like that? Sam asked, coming up beside her. It's pretty, Zelda said. I was just thinking I could make a dress from it, something more practical than what I have now. Get it, Sam said immediately, and whatever else you need, thread, needles, anything. Zelda started to protest, but Sam cut her off. Please, let me do this. You have been working hard around the cabin. It's only fair. So Zelda picked out fabric and notions, feeling a thrill of excitement she had not felt in years. Sam paid for everything without blinking, adding it to his already considerable pile of supplies. As they were loading everything onto Copper, a man approached them. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his coat. Sam, he said with a nod. Heard you had a visitor. News traveled fast in small towns, apparently. Sam introduced Zelda to Sheriff William Crane, who tipped his hat politely. "Miss Carson, if you don't mind my asking, what brings you to our neck of the woods?" the sheriff asked. His tone was friendly, but there was a hint of professional curiosity in it. Zelda glanced at Sam, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I was abandoned during the blizzard," she said quietly. "The man I was traveling with left me at an old mining camp." Sheriff Crane's expression darkened. "He have a name, this man, Benjamin Marsh, but he's long gone by now." The sheriff pulled out a small notebook and jotted down the name. "I'll keep an ear out. If he comes through here, I'll have some words with him. That's a low thing to do, especially to a lady." "Thank you, Sheriff," Zelda said. They said their goodbyes and started the ride back to the cabin. Zelda was quiet, thinking about the encounter. The sheriff had been kind, but his questions had reminded her that she was a woman alone, with no family and no clear future. She was dependent on Sam's charity, and while he seemed happy to give it, that could not last forever. That evening, as Zelda sat by the fire working on cutting out her new dress, Sam sat across from her whittling a piece of wood. The silence was comfortable, companionable, but Zelda could feel the weight of unsaid things pressing down on her. "Sam," she said finally, not looking up from her work. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life, and you have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." Sam stopped whittling and looked at her. "You had every right to expect kindness. That is what decent people do for each other. Still, I want you to know how much it means to me, Zelda." Sam's voice was soft. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you want? Not what you think you should do or what's practical. What do you actually want?" The question hung in the air between them. Zelda's hands stilled on the fabric. What did she want? The truth rose up in her throat, terrifying and undeniable. "I want to stay here," she whispered. "With you, I know that is foolish and impossible, but that is what I want." Sam set down his whittling and crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Why is it impossible?" "Because I barely know you. Because you did not ask for me to show up in your life. Because I have nothing to offer you but trouble and complications." "Zelda," Sam said, and there was a rough edge to his voice that sent shivers down her spine. "You are not trouble. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years. I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay, but I did not want to presume. I did not want you to think you owed me anything." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You want me to stay, more than anything," Sam said. He raised one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a week, but I have never been more sure of anything. When I found you in that snow, when I thought I might be too late, it terrified me. And every day since, I have been dreading the moment you would leave. So yes, I want you to stay if you will have me." Zelda felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll stay." Sam's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, and then he was pulling her down from the chair and into his arms. Zelda went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. They knelt there on the floor together, holding each other like they were afraid the other might disappear. "I've got you," Sam murmured into her hair, echoing the words he had spoken when he first found her. "I've got you now, always." Zelda pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Always," she repeated, and then Sam was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect. Zelda melted into him, feeling like she had finally come home. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Silverton, with Sheriff Crane and Mrs. Patterson as witnesses. Zelda wore a dress she had made herself from the blue fabric Sam had bought her, and Sam wore his best shirt, freshly pressed. It was a simple ceremony, but Zelda had never been happier. They rode back to the cabin, which was now her cabin too, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Sam lifted her down from copper and then, without warning, scooped her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" Zelda laughed. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," Sam said, grinning. "It's tradition." He carried her inside and set her down gently, and Zelda looked around at the small space that was now her home. She had never imagined this when she left Arizona with Benjamin. She had been looking for security, for comfort, for a future. Instead, she had found love. That night, as she lay in Sam's arms in the bed they now shared, Zelda thought about how close she had come to dying in that blizzard. How easily she could have given up, let the cold take her. But she had held on, and Sam had found her, and now she had a life beyond anything she had dreamed. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, his voice drowsy. "How lucky I am," Zelda said. Sam tightened his arms around her. "I'm the lucky one." The months that followed were the happiest of Zelda's life. She threw herself into making the cabin a real home, sewing curtains and tablecloths, planting a garden as soon as the ground thawed. Sam taught her to ride copper and helped her pick out a horse of her own, a sweet-tempered mare they named Juniper. Together, they worked the ranch, tending the cattle and making plans for the future. Zelda also started taking on sewing work from the women in Silverton. Word spread that there was a talented seamstress at the Ingram Ranch, and soon she had more orders than she could handle. She worked in the evenings after the ranch chores were done, her needle flying as she created dresses and shirts and quilts. Sam was endlessly supportive, building her a proper sewing table and making sure she had good light to work by. "You're going to make us rich," he teased one evening as she finished a particularly elaborate dress for the wife of a local rancher. "Or at least comfortable," Zelda replied, pressing a kiss to his cheek. They were comfortable more than that. They were happy. Sam was everything Benjamin had pretended to be, steady and honest and true. He never raised his voice to Zelda, never made her feel small or foolish. They disagreed sometimes, as all couples did, but they talked through their problems instead of letting them fester. As summer turned to fall, Zelda began to notice changes in her body. She was tired more often, and certain smells made her nauseous. She recognized the signs, had seen them in other women back in Quartzsite. She was pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Sam. One evening after dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's going to be 3 of us come spring," she said softly. Sam's eyes went wide. "You mean it? You're certain?" Zelda nodded, suddenly nervous. They had not talked about children, had not planned for this. What if he was not ready? But Sam let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We're going to be parents," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Zelda, we're going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Sam worried constantly, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away. But as the months passed and her belly grew round, she began to feel better. She loved feeling the baby move inside her, loved the way Sam would talk to her stomach and tell their child about the ranch and the life they would have together. Winter came again, and with it the memory of the blizzard that had brought them together. But this winter, Zelda was safe and warm in her home with her husband beside her. When another storm blew through in late February, they stayed inside together, playing cards and talking about names for the baby. "If it's a boy, I like Samuel," Zelda said. "After his father." Sam shook his head. "No, I want him to have his own name, not be saddled with mine. What about Thomas? My grandfather was Thomas, and he was a good man." "Thomas Ingram," Zelda said, trying it out. "I like it. And if it's a girl you choose," Sam said, "you're doing all the hard work." Zelda thought for a moment. Grace. My mother's middle name was Grace. Grace Ingram, Sam said softly. That's beautiful. The baby came on a cold morning in early April. Sam rode to Silverton to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda thought she could not do it, could not bear the pain. But Sam stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. Finally, as the sun rose and painted the sky pink and gold, Zelda gave one last push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. "It's a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A healthy, strong boy." She placed the baby in Zelda's arms, and Zelda looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and Sam's brown eyes. He stopped crying when she held him, looking up at her with a solemn expression. "Hello, Thomas," Zelda whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Sam was beside her, his own eyes wet. He reached out a tentative finger and stroked their son's cheek. "He's so small," he breathed. "He'll grow," Mrs. Patterson said with a chuckle. "They always do. Now you two get to know your boy." "I'll make some tea and get you something to eat, Zelda. You've earned it." Those first few weeks with Thomas were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still needed constant care. Zelda was grateful for Sam's help. He changed diapers and walked Thomas around the cabin when he was fussy, and he looked at his son with such love that it made Zelda's heart ache. As spring turned to summer, Thomas grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Zelda loved watching Sam with him, teaching him about the ranch animals and the land. Even though Thomas was far too young to understand, Sam talked to him constantly, pointing out birds and clouds and teaching him the names of the cattle. One evening, when Thomas was about 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in the cradle Sam had built, Zelda and Sam sat together on the porch. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of wildflowers. "You ever think about that day I found you?" Sam asked. Zelda leaned against him, content. "Sometimes. It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once." "I think about it all the time," Sam said. "I think about what would have happened if I had decided not to check on the cattle that day, if I had been even an hour later." He shook his head. "I can't imagine my life without you now, without Thomas. It's like you were always meant to be here." "Maybe we were," Zelda said softly. "Maybe everything that happened, all the bad things, they led me to you, to this." Sam kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Zelda Ingram. I love you too." The years passed, marked by seasons and small milestones. Thomas took his first steps on a warm day in September, toddling across the cabin floor and into his father's arms. He spoke his first word, "Papa," much to Sam's delight and Zelda's mock indignation. He grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals and shadowed his father everywhere. When Thomas was 3, Zelda became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their second child was born in the spring, it was a girl. They named her Grace, as they had planned. Grace was different from Thomas, quieter and more contemplative. She had Zelda's green eyes and a serious expression that sometimes made her look like a tiny adult. Zelda adored her, and Sam was utterly smitten. Thomas was initially suspicious of this new person, who took up so much of his parents' attention. But he quickly became fiercely protective of his baby sister. Zelda's sewing business continued to grow. By the time Grace was 2, Zelda had saved enough money to pay for materials to build an addition onto the cabin, a dedicated room for her work. Sam built it himself, with help from some of the neighbors who had become friends over the years. The room had big windows for good light and shelves for her fabric and supplies. It was everything Zelda had dreamed of. She even started selling her work in Cheyenne, sending dresses and quilts with a merchant who traveled between towns. The extra income allowed them to expand the ranch, buying more cattle and better equipment. They were prospering, building a real future. But more than the material success, Zelda treasured the life they had built together. The quiet mornings when Sam would bring her coffee while she nursed the baby. The evenings when they would all sit together, Sam reading to Thomas while Zelda rocked Grace. The way Sam still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. One night when Thomas was 8 and Grace was 5, Zelda stood in the doorway of the children's room watching them sleep. Sam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "They're getting so big," he murmured. "I know," Zelda said. "Sometimes I can't believe they are ours." "Best things I ever did were finding you in that blizzard and convincing you to marry me," Sam said. Zelda turned in his arms to face him. "You didn't have to convince me. I was already in love with you." "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you," Sam confessed. "Even half frozen and barely conscious, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And then you opened your eyes and looked at me, and I was done for." After all these years, Sam could still make her blush. "You never told me that. I'm telling you now." He kissed her gently. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that I went out to check on those cattle, that I found you when I did. You're my everything, Zelda." "And you're mine," Zelda whispered. When Thomas turned 10, he started talking about wanting to work the ranch full-time when he grew up. Sam was pleased but insisted that Thomas get a proper education first. They hired a tutor who came out from Silverton twice a week to teach Thomas and Grace their letters and numbers. Both children were bright, and Zelda loved seeing their minds expand. Grace, it turned out, had inherited her mother's talent with a needle. By the time she was 7, she was helping Zelda with simple sewing projects, and by 8, she was making her own doll clothes. Zelda taught her everything she knew, and Grace soaked it up like a sponge. The ranch continued to thrive. Sam's herd grew to over 200 head, and he hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. The cabin had been expanded twice more, and now they had a real house with multiple bedrooms and a parlor. It was a far cry from the small, simple cabin where they had started, but despite all the changes, some things stayed the same. Sam and Zelda still sat on the porch together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. They still talked about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams. They still looked at each other with the same love and wonder that had brought them together. When Zelda turned 35, Sam threw her a party, inviting all their friends and neighbors from Silverton and the surrounding ranches. The house was full of laughter and music, and Zelda danced with her husband and her children, feeling more blessed than she had ever thought possible. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Sam gave her a gift. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved. "Open it," he said, his eyes twinkling. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant. Zelda picked it up and saw that the pendant was engraved with 2 words, "Always found." "Sam," she breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted you to have something to remember," he said softly. "To remember that even when you were lost, you were found, and you always will be." Zelda threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "I love you so much. I love you too, always." The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. There was the year the drought hit, and they nearly lost the ranch, saved only by Sam's careful planning and the community coming together to help each other. There was the year Grace won a ribbon at the county fair for a quilt she had made entirely herself. There was the year Thomas brought home a girl he wanted to marry, and Sam and Zelda saw their son grow into a man. Through it all, Sam and Zelda remained each other's constant. They had their disagreements, their hard times, but they always came back to each other. They had built something real and lasting, something that would outlive them both. When Thomas married his sweetheart, a kind girl named Martha from a neighboring ranch, it was Sam and Zelda who gave them the plot of land to build their own house. When Grace fell in love with a young man who worked at the general store in Silverton, it was Sam who walked her down the aisle and Zelda who made her wedding dress. And then came the grandchildren. Thomas and Martha had 3 boys in quick succession, rambunctious and full of energy. Grace and her husband had twin girls, sweet and gentle like their mother. Sam and Zelda loved being grandparents, spoiling the children and then sending them home to their parents. "We have built quite a legacy," Zelda said one evening as they watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Sam took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. They were both older now, their hair gray and their faces lined, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "We have built a life," he said, "a good life, and it all started with the best decision I ever made." "What decision was that?" "To ride out in that blizzard, to not give up until I found you." He smiled at her, the same warm smile that had won her heart all those years ago. "I've got you now. Always." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their family together. Her children, her grandchildren, all of them here because she had survived that blizzard. Because Sam Ingram had refused to let her die in the snow. "Always," she echoed. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and loss she had endured. The fear and desperation of that terrible blizzard. The moment Sam had lifted her from the snow and promised her safety. She had been looking for security when she left Arizona with Benjamin. She had been looking for a future, for something better than what she had. But she had found so much more than that. She had found love, real and deep and true. She had found a partner who respected her and cherished her. She had found a home, not just a place but a feeling of belonging. And she had found herself, the woman she was always meant to be. Years later, when Zelda and Sam were well into their 60s, they still lived on the ranch, though Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending Zelda's garden and watching their grandchildren grow. They had been married for over 40 years, and their love had only deepened with time. One winter evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, Zelda sat by the fire with her sewing while Sam read the newspaper. It was peaceful, domestic, perfect. Zelda looked up from her work and found Sam watching her with a soft expression. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking about how beautiful you are," Sam said. "How lucky I am. After all these years, you still think I'm beautiful." "After all these years, you're more beautiful than ever," Sam said firmly. He set aside his paper and came to kneel beside her chair, just as he had done all those years ago when she had confessed she wanted to stay. "You're my whole world, Zelda. You always have been." Zelda set down her sewing and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "And you're mine. You saved me, Sam, not just from the blizzard. You saved me from a life of loneliness and fear. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Sam corrected gently. He kissed her, soft and sweet, and Zelda felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he kissed her. Some things never changed. That night, as they lay in bed together, Sam held Zelda close. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Benjamin had not abandoned you?" he asked. Zelda considered the question. "Sometimes, but I can't imagine it, really. That life feels like it belonged to someone else. The woman I was before I met you, she was lost, scared. She didn't know who she was or what she wanted, but you helped me find myself. You helped me become the woman I was always meant to be." "I think you were always that woman," Sam said. "You just needed the right circumstances to let her shine." "Maybe," Zelda conceded. "But those circumstances were you. Everything good in my life came from you. From us," Sam insisted. "We built this life together." Zelda smiled in the darkness. "Together," she agreed. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had slept for over 40 years. And when Zelda dreamed, she dreamed of snow and warmth, of a voice saying, "I've got you now. Always." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sam woke first, as he usually did, and lay for a moment just watching Zelda sleep. Her hair was silver now, spread across the pillow, and her face was peaceful. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He thought about the day he had found her, half frozen in the snow. He had been checking on his cattle, just doing what needed to be done, and he had stumbled across a miracle. A woman who would become his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, the love of his life. He had meant those words he spoke in the blizzard. "I've got you now. Always." And he had kept that promise every day since. Through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship, through raising children and building a ranch. He had kept her safe, and she had kept him whole. Zelda stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, beautiful," Sam replied. They got up together and started their day, moving through the familiar routines they had perfected over decades. Sam made coffee while Zelda started breakfast. They ate together, talking about the day ahead. Thomas would be coming by with the grandchildren later. There was always something to look forward to. After breakfast, Sam put on his coat to go check on the horses. Zelda stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I love you," she said simply. Sam pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I love you too, always." It was a word they used often, that always, because it was true. Their love was not a fleeting thing, not something that would fade with time. It was forever, eternal, unbreakable. It had survived blizzards and droughts, arguments and accidents, the trials of raising children and running a ranch. It had survived everything, and it would continue to survive. As Zelda watched Sam walk out to the barn, she felt a deep sense of peace. This was her life. This ranch, this man, this family. It was not the life she had planned for when she left Arizona all those years ago. It was so much better. She thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and alone in the snow, convinced she was going to die. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she would not believe it. She would not believe that the man who found her would become her everything. She would not believe that she would find such profound happiness in a small cabin in Wyoming. She would not believe that love could be so real, so deep, so lasting. But it was all true. Every impossible, wonderful bit of it. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren were born. Thomas's boys grew tall and strong, taking to ranching like their father and grandfather before them. Grace's twins became talented seamstresses, learning from their grandmother. The family grew and thrived, spreading out across Wyoming but always coming back to the ranch for holidays and celebrations. Sam and Zelda grew older, but they did so together. They moved a little slower, needed a little more rest, but their love never diminished. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed goodnight before bed. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had defined their entire marriage. When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. The house was full to bursting with children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. There was food and music and laughter, and at the center of it all were Sam and Zelda, the foundation upon which this entire family was built. Thomas stood up to make a toast, raising his glass high. To my parents, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Two people who have shown us all what real love looks like, what real commitment looks like. You have built an incredible life together, and we are all better for being part of it. To Sam and Zelda. To Sam and Zelda, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Zelda felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Sam's arm was around her waist, solid and sure. 50 years, he murmured in her ear, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Zelda whispered back. Every single moment. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Sam and Zelda sat together on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. They sat in the same chairs they had sat in for decades, holding hands in the darkness. "Do you remember the first time we sat out here together?" Sam asked. "The night I told you I wanted to stay," Zelda said. "How could I forget? It was the night you asked me to marry you. Best decision I ever made," Sam said. "I think finding me in that blizzard was the best decision you ever made," Zelda teased. Sam laughed, a sound that never failed to warm Zelda's heart. Fair point. That was definitely up there. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Finally, Zelda spoke. "I want you to know something, Sam. I want you to know that I have been happy. Every single day of our marriage, even the hard days, I have been happy, because I had you." Sam brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I have been happy too. You are my greatest blessing, Zelda. You and our family. Everything I have, everything I am, it's because of you. Because of us," Zelda corrected, echoing what he had said so many times before. "Because of us," Sam agreed. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then made their way to bed. As they had done for 50 years, they fell asleep in each other's arms, two hearts beating as one. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Sam and Zelda were in their 70s now, content to let the younger generations run the ranch while they enjoyed their twilight years. They spent their days in simple pleasures, tending the garden, playing with the great-grandchildren, reading by the fire. They had earned their rest and they savored it, but even as their bodies slowed, their love remained constant. Sam still brought Zelda her morning coffee. Zelda still mended Sam's shirts, even though she did not take sewing commissions anymore. They still talked about everything, still laughed together, still found new things to love about each other. One spring day, as Zelda sat in the garden watching the flowers bloom, she thought about the journey of her life. From quartzsite to Wyoming. From a lonely seamstress to a wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. From a woman abandoned in a blizzard to a woman surrounded by love. It had not been an easy life. There had been hardships and heartbreaks, losses and disappointments. But through it all, she had Sam. And that had made all the difference. Sam came out to join her in the garden, moving slowly but steadily. He sat beside her on the bench he had built years ago and took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Zelda said. "Our whole life together. How lucky I am." "How lucky we both are," Sam said. He squeezed her hand gently. "I meant what I said that day in the snow, you know. I've got you, always." "I know," Zelda said softly. "And I've got you too. Always." They sat together in the garden, surrounded by the beauty they had created, the family they had built, the life they had shared. And as the sun warmed their faces and the flowers swayed in the breeze, Zelda thought that this was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but this. Quiet contentment with the person you love. Years continued to pass, and Sam and Zelda moved into their 80s. Their bodies were frail now, but their spirits remained strong. They still lived on the ranch, cared for by their children and grandchildren who refused to let them go anywhere else. This was their home, and here they would stay. On a cold winter morning, not unlike the one when they had met so many years ago, Zelda woke to find Sam already awake beside her, watching her with tender eyes. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft with age. "Good morning, my love," Sam replied. His hand found hers under the blankets, their fingers interlacing automatically after so many decades of practice. "You know what day it is?" Zelda asked. Sam smiled. "It's the anniversary of the day I found you, 58 years ago today." "You remembered," Zelda said, though she was not surprised. Sam never forgot. "How could I forget the most important day of my life?" Sam shifted carefully to face her more fully. "I still think about it, you know. That moment when I saw you in the snow, I thought my heart would stop. I had never been so scared in my life. But you saved me," Zelda said, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "You saved me, and you loved me, and you gave me the most beautiful life." "We gave each other that," Sam said. "I was just existing before you, Zelda, going through the motions. But you made me truly live." They lay together in the early morning light, holding each other close. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, gentle and soft. But inside, they were warm and safe and loved. Their family came to visit later that day, bringing food and laughter and stories. The great-grandchildren, some of them teenagers now, listened in awe as Sam and Zelda told them the story of how they met. It was a story they had heard before, but they never tired of it. The romance of it, the drama, the happy ending. "Tell us again what you said when you found Grandma," one of the younger great-grandchildren asked Sam. Sam smiled and pulled Zelda close. "I said, I've got you now, always." "And he meant it," Zelda added. "He has kept that promise every single day since." The children sighed happily, and the adults exchanged knowing looks. Sam and Zelda were the love story their whole family was built on, the proof that true love was not just a fairy tale. As winter turned to spring, and spring to summer, Sam and Zelda continued to enjoy each day they had together. They knew their time was growing shorter, that the years were catching up with them, but they did not fear it. They had lived fully and loved completely. They had built a legacy that would outlive them both. One warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sam turned to Zelda with a serious expression. "When my time comes," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I have no regrets. None. Every moment with you has been a gift." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "Don't talk like that. We have to talk about it eventually," Sam said gently. "We are not young anymore, my love, but I want you to know that I am not afraid. How could I be when I have had such a beautiful life?" "I'm not ready to lose you," Zelda whispered. "And I'm not ready to lose you," Sam replied. "But whatever happens, we will face it together, just like we have faced everything else." Zelda leaned against him, taking comfort in his strength even as she felt it beginning to fade. "Together," she agreed. They sat together until the stars came out, holding hands in the darkness, grateful for every moment they had left. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Sam and Zelda marked each one with quiet celebration. They had long since stopped taking time for granted, savoring each sunrise, each meal together, each conversation. Their family surrounded them with love and care, making sure they wanted for nothing. On a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were gold and red and the air was sweet with the smell of harvest, Sam woke feeling different. Not bad exactly, but different. Changed. He looked at Zelda sleeping beside him, her silver hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He thought about their life together, the children they had raised, the ranch they had built, the love they had shared. It had been more than he ever could have hoped for. More than he deserved, though Zelda always insisted he was wrong about that. He had meant those words he spoke in the blizzard all those years ago. "I've got you now, always," and he had kept that promise. Through 58 years of marriage, through every joy and every sorrow, he had been there for her, and she had been there for him. Zelda stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, beautiful," Sam replied, as he had every morning for decades. They rose together and went through their morning routine, moving slowly but contentedly. Sam made coffee while Zelda prepared a simple breakfast. They ate together at the kitchen table, talking about the day ahead. Thomas would be bringing the grandchildren by later. It would be a good day. But as the morning wore on, Sam felt increasingly tired. He did not mention it to Zelda, not wanting to worry her, but she noticed anyway. She always noticed. "Are you all right?" she asked, concern in her green eyes. "Just tired," Sam said, which was not a lie. "I think I'll rest for a bit." He settled into his favorite chair by the fire, and Zelda brought him a blanket. She sat beside him with her sewing, content to just be near him. Sam watched her work, her hands still steady even after all these years, and felt a deep sense of peace. "Zelda," he said softly. She looked up immediately. "Yes, I love you. I need you to know that. I love you more than anything in this world." Zelda set down her sewing and took his hand. "I know, and I love you too. Always." "Always," Sam echoed. He closed his eyes just for a moment, he thought, just to rest. But the weariness was stronger than he expected, pulling him down into darkness. The last thing he heard was Zelda's voice, soft and full of love, saying his name. Sam Ingram passed away peacefully that autumn morning in his favorite chair, holding the hand of the woman he loved. He was 84 years old, and he had lived a full and beautiful life. Zelda sat beside him for a long time, holding his hand even after it grew cold, unwilling to let him go. Their children found her there when they arrived for their visit, and they gently helped her to bed while they made the necessary arrangements. The funeral was held 3 days later. It seemed like the entire county turned out to pay their respects. Sam had been a good man, fair and honest and kind, and he was deeply mourned. But the greatest mourner was Zelda, who had lost her partner of 58 years. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Zelda's life. Harder even than being abandoned in the blizzard, because at least then she had not known what she was missing. Now she knew exactly what she had lost. The house felt empty without Sam. The bed felt too big. Everything reminded her of him, and the grief was overwhelming, but she was not alone. Her family surrounded her with love, making sure she was never by herself for too long. They shared memories of Sam, stories that made her laugh and cry. Slowly, very slowly, the sharp edge of grief began to dull. Zelda found comfort in the legacy she and Sam had built together. Their children were good people, strong and kind. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on the family traditions. The ranch they had built from nothing was thriving under Thomas's care. Sam lived on in all of these things. One spring day, almost 6 months after Sam's death, Zelda sat in the garden they had tended together. The flowers were blooming and the air was sweet. She could almost feel Sam's presence beside her, could almost hear his voice on the wind. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty air. "Every single day, I miss you." But she also felt grateful. Grateful for the 58 years they had shared. Grateful for the love that had sustained her through so much. Grateful that she had been found in that blizzard by a man who had loved her truly and completely. She thought about Sam's words. "I've got you now. Always." He had kept that promise until the very end, and in a way he was keeping it still. She felt his love surrounding her, supporting her, even in his absence. Zelda lived for 3 more years after Sam's death. They were quiet years, spent with her family and her memories. She told stories about Sam to the great-grandchildren, making sure they knew what an extraordinary man their great-grandfather had been. She tended the garden and did small sewing projects. She lived. On a cold winter morning, much like the one when Sam had found her all those years ago, Zelda woke feeling different. Not afraid, but peaceful. Ready. She thought about Sam, waiting for her. She thought about the life they had shared and the love that had defined it. When Thomas came to check on her that morning, he found her in bed, a peaceful smile on her face. Zelda Carson Ingram had passed away in her sleep at the age of 87, joining the man who had loved her for 58 years. They buried her beside Sam on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire family was there, 3 generations standing together in the cold. Thomas spoke, his voice breaking as he talked about his mother's strength and grace. Grace shared memories that made everyone laugh through their tears. The great-grandchildren laid flowers on the grave. And as the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the family stood together and remembered. They remembered Sam and Zelda, the love story that had started with a blizzard and ended with a legacy that would last forever. Years later, when those great-grandchildren had children of their own, they would tell them the story. About a cowboy who found a woman freezing in the snow and said, "I've got you now, always." About a love that had survived everything and created a family that spanned generations. About 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life together that was more beautiful than either could have imagined. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, and believe in love. Because they could see the proof of it all around them, in the ranch that still stood, in the family that had grown from 2 lonely people who found each other in a blizzard. Sam and Zelda's love story became a legend in their family, passed down through the generations. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, that love was real and lasting, that a single act of kindness, of one person refusing to give up on another, could change everything. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants. The house was expanded and modernized, but Sam's original cabin remained, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Young couples in the family would sometimes stay there on their wedding nights, wanting to feel close to the love that had started it all. And on cold winter nights when the snow fell soft and thick, the family would gather together and tell the story again. About Zelda, abandoned and freezing. About Sam, brave and true. About a promise made in a blizzard and kept for a lifetime. "I've got you now. Always." Those words became a family motto, passed down through generations. Parents whispered them to their children. Lovers said them to each other. They were a promise and a commitment, a reminder of what real love looked like. Because Sam and Zelda had shown them all what was possible when 2 people found each other and chose to build a life together. They had faced hardships and losses, but they had faced them together. They had celebrated joys and victories, always side by side. They had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives, a legacy of love that would never fade. In a cemetery on a hill in Wyoming, 2 headstones stood side by side. They were simple stones, nothing fancy, but the inscription said everything that mattered. Samuel Ingram, beloved husband, father, grandfather, I've got you now, always. Zelda Carson Ingram, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, always found. And beneath the ground, in the soil they had worked and loved, Sam and Zelda rested together. Their journey was complete, their love story told. But the impact of that love would echo through the generations, a testament to the power of 2 hearts beating as one. The blizzard that had brought them together had been terrible and deadly, but it had also been the beginning of something beautiful. It had taken a woman lost and afraid and led her to the man who would love her for the rest of her life. It had given a lonely cowboy the family and purpose he had always craved. From tragedy had come triumph. From despair had come hope. From a moment of crisis had come a lifetime of love. And that was the real story. Not just that Sam had found Zelda in the snow, though that was remarkable enough, but that they had chosen each other every single day for 58 years, that they had built a life together based on respect and partnership and deep, abiding affection, that they had created a family that would carry on their values and their love long after they were gone. Their great-great-grandchildren, children Sam and Zelda never got to meet, but whose existence was only possible because of them, would grow up hearing the story. And some of them would find their own loves, their own partners, and they would think of Sam and Zelda. They would remember the promise made in a blizzard and kept for a lifetime. They would strive to build the same kind of love, the same kind of life. And in this way, Sam and Zelda's love never truly ended. It lived on in every generation, in every couple who chose to commit to each other, in every promise kept, and every tender moment shared. The ranch they had built became a gathering place for the family, a home base where everyone returned for holidays and celebrations. The land they had worked so hard to cultivate continued to provide for their descendants. The house they had filled with love and laughter still echoed with both, just from different voices. Everything they had built, everything they had created, it all lasted. Because true love, the kind of love Sam and Zelda had shared, did not fade with time. It only grew stronger, spreading out like roots from a tree, touching everything and everyone it encountered. On the anniversary of the day Sam found Zelda, the family would gather at the ranch. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest members knew their history. They would toast to Sam and Zelda, thanking them for the legacy they had left. And they would remember that love, true love, was worth fighting for, worth holding on to, worth everything, because Sam and Zelda had proven it. They had shown that even in the harshest conditions, even when all seemed lost, love could survive, could thrive, could create something beautiful and lasting. The blizzard was long over. The snow had melted and new snow had fallen countless times since. But the warmth of the love kindled on that cold day, when a cowboy found a freezing woman and promised her safety, that warmth endured. It burned bright in the hearts of their descendants, a flame that would never go out. Sam and Zelda's story was a love story, yes. But it was also a story of hope, of resilience, of the incredible things that could happen when two people found each other and refused to let go. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. And so it was told, generation after generation, a reminder that love was real, that promises could be kept, that even in the darkest blizzard, if you held on long enough, someone might find you, someone might say those magic words, "I've got you now, always." And if you were very lucky, like Zelda had been, they would mean it. They would prove it every single day for the rest of your life. They would build a future with you, create a family with you, grow old with you. They would be your always, just as you were theirs. That was the true legacy of Sam and Zelda Ingram. Not the ranch, though it was impressive. Not the material wealth they had accumulated, though it provided well for their descendants. Their true legacy was the proof that love like theirs existed, that it was possible, that it was worth striving for. And as long as their story was told, as long as their descendants gathered to remember them, Sam and Zelda's love would never die. It would live on forever, a beacon of hope and a promise that true love, real love, the kind that lasted always, was not just a dream. It was real. Sam and Zelda had proved it, and their promise, made in a blizzard and kept for a lifetime, echoed through the generations. "I've got you now, always, always."